as APAC perspective. And I think I'd like to leave my panelists to introduce themselves to show the depth of which we see this experience that's on the stage today. Nikunj, let's start with you.
Xin chào, my name is Nikunj, and I'm very passionate about solving advertising problems using technologies. And at StackAdapt, I am responsible for inventory and data partnerships across the market. And I wish to share some of my experience today with you. So very happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Well, I think most of them have seen your cute slide.
See my 5-year-old photo.
Yes.
So I've spent a number of decades working on the media owner side, agency side, and on the brand side. But most recently, for the last 6 to 7 years, worked in global media planning and buying, and can see the entire industry from a holistic perspective, from a marketer's perspective, and also from a buyer's perspective, and also the different media owners and what they can contribute to in terms of performance on a media plan. And I'm incredibly passionate about it, which is why I've dedicated my entire career to it.
And I think that's why it's really relevant to kind of put this in perspective with the overall landscape, because both of you come from omni-channel, right? So it's good to kind of see how and where it's all evolved. So I'm just waiting for our people to just turn my slide to the next one. Guys, can you move the slide? So to just kind of look at this entire advent that's happened, right, in terms of urbanization. So I'd love you to get both your perspective, and maybe Mel, I'll start with you, in terms of seeing how it's not just, just urbanization, but the growth of, condominiums, office buildings, large buildings, which have led to the way, we have seen elevators itself being made, available.
Absolutely. So the urbanisation part of it is obviously a very logical step in all urbanisation areas. The more people that are living in office towers and living in residential towers and working in office towers. But the actual media itself has developed so rapidly and also so smartly in the quality of the screens, the placement of the screens, not just inside the elevator, but also in a high dwell environment, waiting for the elevators, and then also very smartly the creative that's used to really engage the audiences, and that is only going to continue in the next 1 to 2 years, especially with the implementation of different ways to do different creative, including 3D-like creative that will engage and grab attention more so than ever.
And we're seeing that as a rapid growth, right, both in terms of the actual revenue as well as the digitizing, right? So a little bit, maybe we can talk towards the revenue on this as well. Nikunj, if you could just elaborate a little bit on how that is kind of going towards that.
Well, yeah, this is a stat from World Out of Home Organization, and what we have seen is that with all the urbanization, a lot of new inventory is coming in, and all the elevators being installed in the office buildings, in apartments, we are getting to have demographics which have been hard to reach. These are the demographics which have high disposable income, and as we see, a very significant percentage, like 36% of the entire out-of-home in APAC is traded digitally. And it is increasing rapidly because with all the urbanization here, we see that the entire supply of digital out-of-home is increasing, and especially if you look at elevator digital media, there is a lot of supply which is constantly being created, whether it's the hospitals being built, whether it's the apartments in entire Southeast Asia, South Asia, even in Australia, in Singapore, and India, and in Japan, and we see a lot more many touch points being added. And some of the countries are leading much more, and some of them are still adapting. But those numbers are pretty much the testament to that, making a digital progress on an out-of-home industry, which has been incumbent on flex posters, is the new way of transacting media dollars.
And Melanie, if you could add a little perspective, if you look at the numbers, they're not drastically different, right? When you look at APAC versus versus North America, for example, or even Europe, where they're supposed to be more advanced. I mean, and this is an average out, right? So if we talk about one of the most advanced markets in this region would be Australia. So maybe you could, talk to that a little bit and kind of give us the perspective in terms of what's the difference between, say, in Australia versus the rest of APAC.
Well, that's a very deep question. So, in terms of the digitisation of assets, the biggest barrier is the cost. And from a media owner perspective, we need to make sure that there is a very much a plan to return on that investment. But there's now businesses that are popping up around the media owners that will actually allow them to take on investment to get the digitisation done so the revenue flows quickly. So I think we'll see when the World Out-of-Home Organisation releases the next set of results for 2024, which I think will be in Mexico in about 2 weeks, that we'll probably see that growth spike even further. Now, when it comes to Australia actually did something really critical to the industry about 13 years ago, where they formed the Outdoor Media Association, which was a unified body to represent out-of-home media owners. And all the media owners actually contributed financially to it, but also contributed their team's time and their executive leaders' time to really develop the industry as a whole in a unified way. And one of the key drivers of identified revenue growth was the digitisation of assets. Now, it's not just about replacing a poster with a digital screen, it's actually what you can do with the digitisation and the creativity that comes with it and the capability of those screens. It really transformed the industry in Australia. And thankfully, I was part of the digitisation of the street furniture network very early on with Clear Channel and AdShell, and we found that the capability of out-of-home grew significantly, which meant marketers could do so much more with their advertising spend, which is very critical to return on investment and return on ad spend.
And I think that perfectly segues into the next question that I have, which is primarily around looking at how the perception has changed, right? In not only digital out-of-home, so out-of-home has evolved over the last decades, so it's not just become digital out-of-home, and now specifically elevated digital media. How has that perception changed, both of you, I'll start with Mel, on both from an advertiser as well as an agency perspective, right? How do they look at that as a medium?
There's definitely a perception change because the way you can use it has changed. It's not just about putting out the same piece of advertising and hoping for the best and hoping for reach and frequency. The capability of the screen now can really give great results and measurable results, and as I mentioned before, the contextual relevant capability of being able to preload 100 plus different creatives and serve them at the most optimal time to connect in the most optimal way and make the campaign more effective. And when elevated digital media is added into a plan, the extreme reach and frequency that it can provide, combined with the contained private environment that it is, where the message can cut through very strongly in a high dwell time and a downtime where they're more open and receptive to the creative, has absolutely changed the attitude towards it from an agency and marketer's perspective. It's no longer a strong reward. Nikunj, what do you say?
Well, I'll tell you a very small story real quick. Imagine anyway, it's already 5 p.m. But imagine it's 5 p.m. and you're walking out of your office or an apartment, and what you encounter is an advertisement which talks about a free seat on an aviation carrier for some vacation deals, and that triggers an initial thought process with you. Could I scan this code and avail that free seat for my family vacation or for my solo vacation? And I believe the advertisers have started embracing the whole idea of doing more with less, which is to what Mel was talking about. Can we not have a lot more creatives? Can we have a lot more done? And that's what elevated digital media is powering through. That is, they give you an unskippable ad, and that has changed the perception. There is digital, almost everything is skippable. You pay money and ad can be skipped. This is unskippable media, and that is something which has led to change of perception about how can digital out-of-home be leveraged instead of going through the traditional incumbent flex poster.
And I think Melanie already spoken to that, right, in terms of the revenue. But I think digital out of home has led that growth, right? Because it's kind of where the future is. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Definitely. So if we look at it from a logical perspective, when you digitise a screen, you then turn it into share of time versus 100% share of voice with static or classic postals. And naturally there's a multiplier effect when you can run 6 to 10 advertising pieces in a loop. And even if you don't, even if you have the pricing weighted correctly, you still have more yield on that screen than you would with the static side. So from the health of the out-of-home industry and for the betterment of the media owners, being able to digitise drives revenue growth, which means it drives investment in the medium, whether it's research and insights, whether it's better staffing, whether it's higher quality screens or better product for marketers to use, it all contributes. I think one of the big watch-outs though is digitisation is really important for the growth of the industry, but there is also a position on the plan for 100% share of voice, as well as contextually relevant advertising and a portion of that share of time on a digital screen. And that's where really smart marketers are really analysing that to make sure that it's performing correctly and the media mix is the optimal way to present that campaign.
Yeah, and I'm going to stay with you on this because we spoke about this and you spoke about this in your presentation, right? In terms of how the mindset has shifted and how that's kind of looking at performance as well. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit further than what you did when you spoke about this. Just a few more pointers and then we move to Nikunj.
The research piece we did with the neuroscientist team in Melbourne really showed that the cognitive response to advertising in a private contained environment was amplified, and that's due to the lack of distraction. And I must admit, in other media, when there is distraction, there is often compensation, whether it's the orientation of the screen or the size of the screen outside versus a small screen inside. There is some compensation to counteract that. But the cognitive responses were really high. And then when we did the quantitative study, the qualitative study, the results also jumped up because it had a really nice, almost like a cocoon environment for a strong and high dwell time. And when the creative was correct, it really cut through and resonated with the audiences in that short time that they were in the elevators. And then when you multiply that by the fact that they would use those elevators at least 4.86 times a day, and were the first and last touch point of the day, and you add on that multiplier effect to really be the first brand that they recall when they go to search for it or make a decision about buying it.
Absolutely.
Well, if you look at the whole perspective of elevator digital media, what we see is repetition is very high. As some of our colleagues which participated today with the slides, there is an immense repetition and it can just change the way you do certain things. I mean, if I am regularly exposed to a messaging for 21 days in a row, it could just alter my attitude and behavior towards going to a particular supermarket, to perceive a particular consumer electronics brand a little differently. And these contextually relevant important sites are very important in case when you think about, can I have a sequence of messages? Like for the first week we have X amount of messaging from the creative, and then the next week we have something else that keeps the audience interested. And in this whole space, 3D creators is something which would digitally innovate the how you leverage digital elevator media. Because with all the 3D creatives, the moment you step into the elevator, you are now surprised by the way the immersive media is taking a look at you. And you are more curious to look at that and find out, oh my God, what's a creative? I mean, that's what the marketer is always looking for. A few minutes ago, one of our participants was talking about driving a double-digit ROI. I mean, I understand you could always keep brand and performance separate, but when you've got this immersive creative, it's very hard to forget. So that's what the brand recall will do, and it will change the way people have been perceiving a confectionery brand or a travel brand or a finance brand.
Yeah, so to be able to be very creative and be highly personalized, right, in this very small space doesn't really take too much, does it? I mean, when you mean 3D, we're not meaning those anamorphic and 3D rollouts, right, Melanie? Maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more on that. And also talk to maybe certain categories that seem to do well in this kind of space versus the others.
So I'll just address the anamorphic 3D part of it. The last probably 18 months, we've had really intense conversations with the brands that we represent, and we found that anamorphic was a very hot topic and everybody wanted to do it, and there was a real resistance because of the perceived cost of doing it. And also the availability of screens that could run anamorphic, because anamorphic in terms of technology requires a curve or a component screen. When you look at things like Piccadilly Lights in the UK, it's a perfect example. It's the one that a lot of big brands always use because it is built for anamorphic 3D display. However, what we found was working with some media brands that the flat screen, if the creator's done correctly, can give an illusion of 3D. And we ran that as for an alcohol brand in Changi Airport, and on flat screens, so no curve, no corner, and the creative has done so beautifully layered butterflies and flowers, and then the bottle display, that the illusion when you walk past felt like it was a 3D anamorphic, but actually it was just a very cleverly layered creative, and it absolutely stood out on the screen. So that technology and ability to give a 3D-like appearance in a small contained environment would absolutely stand out.
Sticking with this, very unique, creative ways of rolling out, maybe Nikunj, you could elaborate a little bit more the unconventional campaigns we're talking about that were rolled out within this kind of small spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. We have seen a school company who runs a lot of international schools in Singapore come to us and say, hey, we want to solve a problem that we want to reach out to the parents of who's looking forward to put their kindergartners into the school, and kids who are smaller and looking for play schools. And they said that we have been spending money on multiple channels, but we haven't been able to collect a lot of meaningful leads. And that's where the elevator media screens in residential buildings and office towers have helped us collect a lot of leads. Well, the campaign was not about just collecting leads, but the impact it had made the marketeer realize that there is a whole lot of new things which we must do in order to reach out with our messages very succinctly and very clearly that, hey, we are a great place for your kid to trust us with for 3 hours a day, and would you like a school tour? And that was the most unconventional campaign I've seen, like, a company who runs an international schools comes back and can I embrace a new media, which is digital. And it's not that you have not seen school ads on traditional out of home, but I believe that was one thing which stood out for me. And the second thing which I've figured out was a company which is called, which is into the domain of safe investing into the ETFs and trading. And with all the macroeconomic challenges we have as of now in the society, they said, hey, we want to reach out to those investors who are willing to choose a safer portfolio for their investments. And we know that high disposable income people are found in office towers and high-rise buildings in residential. So we said like, hey, would you like to test this? And we got some really great results for those portfolios. And those are like 2 different countries I'm quoting.
So Melanie, you have some unconventional categories out there, right? Because people don't think about jewelry. Now, software, yes, but jewelry within an elevated digital media environment. Maybe you could talk to that, because I see that in terms of the actual effectiveness, it's pretty highly effective, right, in this kind of environments.
Yes, and also the time of the year as well. So if you're looking at Christmas, This campaign was run in Australia, so Christmas and Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, and then becomes very relevant to the mindset at that time, thinking about what can I buy for my partner or my mother or my girlfriend or even if you want to buy for a boyfriend. It was very cleverly placed leading up to ensure a lot of priming and awareness ahead of the purchase period. But this one, in terms of the jewellery, also there was a beautiful long tail effect that when the research piece was done, there was still higher performance than pre-campaign for 4 weeks after the campaign had finished. And I have seen that happen in a lot of research pieces that I've commissioned, that the long tail effect is also really powerful in this media. And then software, I think it makes a lot of sense given that this software campaign ran in office towers. You're looking at decision makers and heads of technology and so forth, or even influencers on those decision makers in those environments at times when they could be making decisions. So the pester power around that could also be amplifying the results, but they were very happy with those results, and that was run in Europe. So you can see that the results, regardless of the country in which they're run, is showing the research is showing that there's higher performance when that media is included on the plan.
So just to wrap this up, from both your perspectives, I think because this is a different role that you play. How do you see, in terms of you choosing elevated digital media as a medium that performs, say, better than other mediums in the home space?
Well, I'll go first. What we've seen is, yes, that elevated digital out of home will 100% change the way people have been doing and reading the marketeers' messages. So whether it's a consumer electronics brand or a multi-brand shopping outlet advertising on an elevated digital media, it has got a very high brand recall. And when you enter the elevator media and the elevator itself, you are zoned out from everything else, and it's a very unskippable, clutter-free environment. And you see the number of repetition is quite high. So if I just join these 3-4 dots, it kind of helps a marketer to kind of check box all the important elements, what they want to do. And if we can get our friends from Kantar and Nielsen to validate that for a lot of other advertisers, perhaps it would come out that brand recall is super high. So yeah, and no doubt in the entire scheme of being multi-channel, elevated digital media would be quite close to changing behaviors of the consumer.
I have bought millions and millions of dollars worth of media in my lifetime, and always when I look at the plan, we're looking at initially reaching frequency and understanding where to get to the audience and how frequent that is, because we do know that the basic formula for advertising is reaching frequency for performance. But when I've been doing recent planning, I'm not only looking at reaching frequency, but I'm also looking at segmentation down to displaying different creative to different segments. Particularly like when I recently did a campaign in Singapore, I looked at the psychographic, demographic, geographical placement of different categories within the target audience, and then worked with the creative agency to change up the message to make sure that it was contextually relevant, not only generally to the brand, but also to the mindset of the individual, and also looking at where they lived, where they shopped, and where they worked, and how they commuted around the country, and then changing up those messages. So we ended up with over 100 pieces of creative ready to trigger, depending on what the trigger was and what we had pre-planned the trigger to be. So when I look at the overarching plan, elevated digital media often does make it to the plan because of its strength and reach and frequency, but also its environment and the cut through of the message, and the results show that it cuts through, and then also the capability of the screens. And also, if static's involved with the poster, it also can have branding for 100% inside and outside the lifted capacity digitized.
Thank you both. That actually leaves our next panelist segueing very well into our session, because they're going to talk about how they're part of the plan and how it should be part of the plan. But Thank you both for your global as well as regional perspective on this. Thank you.